Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today along with Craig to give you my definitive review of the brand new, just announced Sigma 24mm f2 DG-DN lens. This is a part of their iSeries of lenses, and these are kind of the smaller alternatives to the Art series, which tend to be larger maximum apertures, much larger lenses. But the iSeries is really about two things. It's about having a smaller, more compact lineup, but premium at the same time. And so it's partly about the experience of capturing and acquiring images, not just the images themselves. And so I really like the iSeries in that regard. But this new 24mm f2 caught me a little bit off guard because it was only 7 months ago in February of 2021 that I was reviewing another 24mm lens in the iSeries from Sigma, the 24mm f3.5 DM. And so I was obviously very surprised to see a second lens with the same focal length from Sigma in less than a year in this series. But clearly, Sigma thought that there was room for both a smaller maximum aperture, extremely compact lens, and then a slightly larger, though still quite compact, lens with a larger maximum aperture. And after having used this lens, while I would say this is the one that I think will have the more broad appeal, I think that they're probably right in that calculation. I think that the iSeries probably has been quite popular among the Sony FE, which I'm testing here, and then Leica L users, because really it gives you a great second-tier alternative of premium lenses that are more compact and cheaper to, the G Master on the Sony front, the premium G Master options. And that's certainly true here if you compare to the 24mm f1.4 G Master. I really like this lens, and I'll detail why as a part of this review. First of all, however, we're going to have a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Phantom Wallet, the minimalist, modern wallet that sets you free from a bulky traditional wallet while also making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. Visit phantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber. You can even customize your wallet with new accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even the Chipolo tracking integration if you're the kind of person who loses their wallet. Use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out. So as noted, the iSeries really is they're gorgeous little lenses, beautiful design elements, and they've really embraced this ideology that you can have both a very compact lens, but also a premium lens at the same time. So let's take a closer look and detail why I think that this combination works for Sigma. So let's take a closer look at another beautiful iSeries lens from Sigma. So this being, of course, the second 24mm in the series, though this is a much larger maximum aperture of f2 versus f3.5. So with the increase in maximum aperture, as is always the case, you do end up with an increase in physical size as well. So this is a larger lens than what the 24mm f3.5 was. This lens is 70 millimeters in diameter. It also has a little bit larger, a filter size of 62 millimeters, and it is also 72 millimeters in length. So significantly longer, and as a byproduct, because it has that same high grade of construction, it is also heavier at 360 grams. Like other iSeries lenses, this is a beautifully made, very tactile lens. Just everything is metal here. The focus ring feels amazing. The aperture ring feels amazing. Just beautifully executed. It also has that kind of laterally placed AF/MF switch that fits better into the space and allows you to have a little bit better defined switch. So that also feels very nice and tactile. There also is some degree of weather sealing here, at least a gasket at the lens mount, though maybe not as much internal seals as the highest grade of lenses. But overall, it is a beautiful feeling lens, and everything here is very highly functional. Like other iSeries lenses from Sigma, the lens hood itself is made of metal, very nicely made, ribbed on the outside and then lateral ribs on the inside, and it bayonets into place with a great deal of precision and feels very nice and looks, you know, good on the lens itself. The fact that it continues on the same kind of ribbing that you see on the focus ring gives the lens some continuity even with the lens hood attached, which is a visual touch that, again, I appreciate. I really like what Sigma has done with this. It's actually a little bit ironic to me that this iSeries is being marketed under the contemporary branding, because in many ways this is about as nice as what Sigma's engineering and build quality comes down to, at least in small primes. I mean, it really is beautifully executed. Now, like other iSeries lenses, we have a dual approach to the front lens cap, including traditional pinch style, but then also the included magnetic style that goes into place and is particularly useful if you're going to use the lens bare. Now, if you use the lens with the hood in place, my experience, it becomes a little less practical. There's a raised lip inside here, so it's much harder to get a finger in there and onto that cap to get it free. And so it's just not all that easy to use. The traditional pinch cap that allows you some room to get in there and pinch is easier. So if you're not using the lens hood, this cap can work. If you are, then it's better to go with the pinch style cap. Now, the lens can focus down to 24.5 centimeters and gives you a magnification ratio of 1 to 6.7, which is right under 0.15 times. So useful, but not exceptional in that regard. Overall, however, we have another compact, beautifully made lens that if you're someone that appreciates something that is very nicely made, the iSeries is going to delight you. Anyway, kind of give me some of those thoughts, because for me, it's become a little more commonplace, just out of repetition. So it was great to hear that kind of that fresh reaction of someone appreciating some of the form factor there.
So one thing, just picking it up, that I was amazed with is just like the engineering quality that it brings. I mean, for example, our aperture ring here, every single click, it just feels so nice and precise. And something that I was thinking about is within video and within photo too, you want to be quick. You don't want to miss the moment that you're there to shoot it, whatever that may be. And so to just adjust aperture, and you don't even have to look. Just 1-2 clicks and you're there, and you know you're there. Exactly. You don't have to doubt it, is something that's really extremely nice.
Yeah.
Something I also noticed is just this manual focus to autofocus. Even the colors are different.
Right.
So just a super close flyby visual inspection, you know if you're on auto or manual, and you don't have to go up and tinker with settings and figure things out. It's all just visually quite apparent.
Right. I think her name is Marie Kondo or something, that her whole thing is all about like sparking joy. Like, do you find joy when using that? And you know, seeing you experience a little bit of that reminded me of this is really what Sigma wants from photographers on that. And it kind of gets wasted on people like myself that get a little jaded because I handle so many pieces of gear. So it's great to see that kind of fresh reaction to that. And that is, I think that's great feedback, because that's certainly what Sigma is. I know from talking to their reps that they are shooting towards in this series. And so it shows that they're hitting the mark and achieving what they want. So as you can see, there's a lot of great things that are going on there. And really, my only kind of overall criticism of the iSeries when it comes to the build, which by the way, I think is gorgeous, is that I would like to see them go a little bit further with the weather sealing. You know, having a gasket at the lens mount is a great first step, but these are premium lenses, and I think that there is room for, you know, further integration of weather sealing inside the body itself. So I'd like to see them advance that a little bit further. Others will note them on the, you know, the Sony version, the missing element of not having a focus hold button. Obviously, that's going to either affect you in a big or small way, depending on how much you utilize the actual focus hold button. But at the same time, there's not necessarily a lot of real estate left on a compact lens. So that was the one thing that had to give as a part of the design here. So let's talk autofocus. Like many of the recent Sigma releases, this 24mm f2 employs a stepping motor, though I've seen it to be a more sophisticated stepping motor than obviously the early generations of stepping motor. So I take that kind of designation with a bit of a grain of salt, because it doesn't really describe the performance of the lens. In this case, we have an autofocus system that is quiet, that is confident, and also is very smooth in operation. Much like these other lenses, it's going to feel a little bit like a broken record in that regard, because the performance has been quite consistent. And in lenses like this, where the demands are a little bit lower, I see very little possibility of this lens not meeting your expectation when it comes to autofocus for photography. For one thing, there's no issue at all with eye detect, be it of a human subject or be it of an animal subject. And so I got really consistent results and a very quick kind of attaching to the eye and sticking to the eye with the autofocus system on my Alpha 1, for example. If I were to approach the camera on video, I had the same kind of result. And there's just maybe a split second longer of acquisition that I saw in this frame with a wider angle point of view and grabbing on than what I saw. And I did note in some of Craig's take on video that there were a few situations where it stayed sticky for a little too long and that it didn't move off the subject when you wanted it to transition to something else. At the same time, however, I did find that when I was intentional about forcing autofocus, so in this case actually touching on the screen where I wanted focus to be, there was no lag or hesitation, but autofocus pulls were nice and smooth with a minimal amount of focus breathing. Not a huge issue there, but certainly a little bit of it. And so overall, autofocus for these situations was very good. And what I found in shooting in a wide variety of situations, including shooting in very, very low light conditions. I mean, we're talking about getting shutter speeds at, ISO 6400 and higher of, just around 1/15 of a second. I was really relying on the in-body image stabilization to get these nighttime marina shots at the Chateau Montebello in Quebec, and I was able to get some really great looking after dark shots handheld, and I had no issues with autofocus during any of these shots. It acquired what I wanted even though it was extremely dim, and in fact the shots look brighter lit than what the actual scene did because of the great sensitivity of the camera's sensor and able to shoot at a low shutter speed. And so that tells me that even in low light conditions, obviously you're going to get better results with this f2 lens than what you would with the f3.5 lens from Sigma, for the simple reason that the camera basically has an extra stop and a third of light reaching the sensor with which to focus. And so I think that this is a lens that, from my experience, is going to work really, really well, with good flexibility in a variety of focus situations. I have no real complaints, no real hesitations in recommending the autofocus on the 24mm f2 iSeries lens from Sigma. So as you can see, both for video and for stills, we've got a great autofocus system here that I found reliable in all the varying conditions. And of course, most notably what stands out compared to the f3.5 is the ability to focus so well in low light conditions. And that's going to give you more versatility with this lens in the kind of scenarios that you can use it in. At the same time also, let's take a look and check in with Craig and see of his findings for performance, both in autofocus and then in the overall footage for video work. Let's take a look.
Would I recommend this lens for video? Well, it doesn't have image stabilization, so that's one knock against it, but it is really good at what it does. And once again, I would say within a certain setting, within a certain standard, it does an incredible job. You get nice soft backgrounds. It really creates that depth of field and the separation that you're looking for. So it does a fantastic job at that. Would I recommend it? Well, it's certainly an incredibly built lens. I mean, you can just listen to the aperture ring click. It's incredible at what it does. For photos, it would be a dream to use. For video, the lack of image stabilization, I know I'm harping on it, but it does detract a little bit. And so if you're going to use this lens for video, stabilize it, set it on tripod, get a gimbal. Now sometimes, I mentioned in the opening interview, I put a Phantom 4 on my back and climbed up a height of a mountain of 3,045 meters. It wasn't fun. It hurt. You don't always want to bring a tripod. You don't always want to bring a gimbal, but for this lens, you're probably going to need it.
So there's a lot of positives to this point, but how does the image quality hold up? Is this a lens that is going to be desirable from an imaging standpoint? Well, let's dive in and let's answer that question in detail. So let's start by taking a look at vignette and distortion. And there we get our first, and fortunately really only kind of negative here. And that is that, as you can see, there is a significant amount of barrel distortion. Now, interestingly, with the f3.5, we actually had a mild amount of pincushion, not barrel distortion. And in this case, we've got much more distortion. And it's of the more wide-angle, traditional barrel type distortion. On the right side, you can see my manual correction. This lens, of course, being in pre-release form, there is no profiles out there for raw images. And so you've seen my manual correction. I've had to use a +18 to try to correct for that barrel distortion, but you can see there's a little bit of a mustache pattern that remains. And I'm sure that the standard profile will correct a little bit better for that, but you can see it's not a completely linear distortion, so it doesn't clean up perfectly. Vignette is actually more mild than what we saw on the f3.5 version. It's not mild in an absolute sense. There's still, a couple of stops worth in the corners, but it's not extreme either and corrects fairly cleanly here. I will do a few points of reference back to the Samyang 24mm f1.8, which is what I consider the most logical competitor for this lens. You can see that the Samyang definitely has a lower amount of distortion here, and it is a little bit more linear and easier to correct. Now, the upside for Sigma is it tends to get better in-camera profile support than what Samyang does, and so at the end of the day, I think that this is probably going to be a little bit of a wash, but just note that there is some barrel distortion that is there that you're going to have to contend with. Now let's talk about various chromatic aberrations. And so we can see, first of all, when it comes to longitudinal chromatic aberrations, you can see that they are very well controlled. Again, we've got bright sun coming through this. We've got some layers of defocus. We can see only the faintest hint of any kind of green fringing back here, but it's so mild as to be just invisible except for at a pixel level. And you can see that longitudinal corrections are aberration corrections are very, very good because the contrast here is just right off the charts. You can see it's very crisp and there's no kind of bleeding, and so it's rendering at a very, very high level. Here's another where I've got spider webs where the low directional sun is coming right through, and you can see only the faintest amount of aberrations there. Everything here is very, very well controlled, so definitely a very strong result on that front. Likewise, with lateral chromatic aberrations, they would show up on either side of these transition areas from black to white, and you can see that they are very, very well controlled. We have a very neutral performance here where everything is as it should look. So all of that adds up to the potential for very high resolution. Here we're using a 50 megapixel Sony Alpha 1, and at 200% we can see in the center of the frame everything is very, very sharp and crisp. Just looks great. Contrast looks great. Moving off here to the mid-frame result looks excellent. If we go kind of kitty corner from that, also looks excellent. And down here into the corner, we can see a great resolution profile that extends right out to the corners, even at f2. So as you know, I really thought very highly of the Samyang 24mm f1.8 when it comes to resolution. Now, obviously, it does have an advantage where it can open up a third stop wider, but we're going to look more, since I've repositioned the center position here, we'll take a look at mid-frame. And we can see that the two lenses are quite similar. The Samyang may have the slightest edge here mid-frame, but it is not at all significant. If we look down here, I think the Samyang is just a little bit better here at f2. If we look down into the corners, however, it really is pretty much a wash in that the Samyang is very similar here. I think at the very, very edge that the Sigma is just a little bit better. Bottom line is that both of these lenses are performing at a very, very high level, and in fact, they're really competing strongly with a lens like the G Master in terms of resolution and contrast here. Everywhere that you look, they look really, really great at f2. So if we stop down from f2 to f2.8 in the center of the frame, we can see that there is a bit of a bump in contrast. Resolution is not really particularly different, just contrast looks better. I would say there's, contrast is also a little bit better here in the mid frame, allowing the darks to be a little bit darker, the brights to be a little bit brighter. And so of course that allows some of these textures to pop just a little bit more. And even down into the corner, you can see a more notable difference there to where the corners look just fantastic here at f2.8. If we check back in with the Samyang at f2.8, you can see that they're both delivering just really, really excellent results. And off into the corner, it's hard to pick much of a winner. I think that the Sigma result is just the slightest bit brighter maybe, but both of them are just really, really exceptional in the results they're giving. Samyang maybe have a slight contrast edge, just ever so slightly sharper in some of these areas, but I mean, both of them are really, really fantastic. So looking at f4 and then f5.6, you can see actually a little bit of a leap ahead at f5.6. So this is clearly going to be a preferred aperture for shooting landscapes. You can just see how really crisp it is in the center of the frame. Really exceptional results here. And likewise, mid-frame just looks a little bit better. And down into the corner, I mean, corners are excellent at both apertures. Ever so slightly better, though, at f5.6. Stopping on down to f8, it's a law of diminishing returns. We have passed the diffraction point on the alpha 1. It's not enough to really negatively impact images, though. Both apertures look excellent, but there's no advantage necessarily of stopping down further for more resolution. If we go out into the real world, f2 and f5.6 here side by side, we can see that in the area where things are in focus here, depth of field obviously is going to be more shallow on the f2 mark. We can see contrast does favor the f5.6, but the result there is very, very good. And even looking into the distance, it's drawing very, very well even at f2. And f5.6 is just going to give you a little bit more contrast, and obviously is going to deepen the depth of field. So we can see here in the foreground, for example, that we've got resolution all the way back here at f5.6, which we don't have at f2. And so definitely the f5.6 is a more natural choice for this kind of setting. However, the good news is that f2 is going to be very valuable when shooting in lower light conditions like at night. Here's a case in point. I was shooting at ISO 1600 after dark, and this is at 1/20th of a second shutter speed. Obviously, in-body image stabilization helps a lot to stabilize the result, but you can see that even after dark here, I'm getting really crisp results without having to really crank up the ISO and getting a great looking image out of it. Likewise here, because I can shoot and get high resolution even at the at f2, I'm able to get a really beautiful looking end result in extremely low light conditions. And as you can see, I'm shooting at ISO 6400 here to get that even at f2 at 1/50th of a second. And so, I mean, that obviously points to a good sensor these days, but also the fact that you can get really good resolution and actually get usable images, in these kind of lighting conditions. Now, darker still is this image where it was ISO 6400 and I still had a 1/13th of a second shutter speed, but you can see that I've got a really great looking 50 megapixel result here that has a little bit of visible noise, yes, but it's a very usable image that comes off of extreme shooting conditions. Obviously, this is going to be a serious advantage over the f3.5 lens and being able to get these kinds of results in low lighting conditions. Now, one area that is radically different in a negative way compared to the f3.5 version is the maximum magnification. In this case, it's only 0.15 times, which is useful, but not nearly as useful as the 0.50 times that we saw on the f3.5 lens. Now, as you can see, looking back at this image, there's only a small usable area in terms of resolution, kind of a sweet spot that you're going to get a little bit flatter plane of focus here, but there's no question that this is going to give you more flexibility than what this is. I found the bokeh quality to generally be quite good. You can see from this image that as you move towards the edge of the frame, you are going to get some of that cat eye deformation, which is pretty common, but the quality of the bokeh looks pretty good. Here, again, we can see, some of that deformation in the corner, but this area through here looks, nice and soft, and you can see that you're able to, have a sharp foreground. In this case, this is kind of best case scenario that I saw for bokeh. Beautiful delineation on the dandelion clocks there, but a nice soft background as well. So, I mean, there's situations where you can get, a really nice looking image out of this, shooting, near the minimum focus distance and blurring out a background. In a more complex situation like this one, however, I felt like there was areas in this transition area where the bokeh got a little bit muddy. And if you're really valuing, bokeh quality, there's nothing here that's going to really compare favorably to a lens like the Sony 24mm f1.4 G Master. Now, obviously, we've got a more attractive option here for shooting the night sky with an f2 aperture that has very consistent results across the frame. I was able to get a really nice, crisp-looking result here, obviously, with capturing lots and lots of stars. Off towards the edge of the frame, I do see a little bit of coma here. You can see in some of these, but it's mild enough that I would still certainly use this lens for shooting in these kinds of conditions. It's not necessarily the best I've seen for controlling coma, but as you can see, it produces very usable results. So I certainly would use it if I purchase this lens. Finally, let's talk about flare resistance. Flare resistance is good, though not the best that I've seen. So we can see overall that here in very, very bright directional sun, that contrast is held up just fine. On the left, where we have a wide open result, we can see that there are a few ghosting artifacts. Not too bad or too destructive, however. If you stop on down to f11, you obviously start to get a more obvious sunburst or sun star effect, but you also incur a little bit more of a ghosting pattern that is going to be more defined, and obviously it's going to be a part of the image. You really can't correct that in a clean fashion, and so you're going to have to compose with that in mind and just know that, you know, if that bothers you, that's going to be a part of the end result. I suspect for most of you that's not destructive enough to turn you off, but that is certainly a consideration with a wide-angle lens like this. And so as you can see, there's a lot of really, really positive things in the optical performance of this lens. I really like the images that I took with it. I liked how the lens performed. And of course, I'm always a fan of the combination of having a compact lens that is also a very high performer optically, because of the very, very simple reason that I am far more likely to grab a compact lens and to bring it along. And a lot of times a larger lens gets left at home more times than not because of just the logistics of carrying it. And so that makes this an extremely attractive lens. And of course it slots in nicely, as noted in the intro, as a second tier alternative to the otherwise excellent Sony 24mm f1.4 G Master. For one thing, at a very reasonable price of about $639 US, this lens is very close to being half the price of the G Master. And while it does have an aperture that is a full stop slower than the f1.4 of the G Master, it also kind of makes up for that from having great image quality from f2 on. And so I think that many people at 24mm might be willing to accept that trade-off to get such an excellent value. It certainly to me seems to be a much better value proposition in price versus performance as compared to the f3.5 version, which I found frankly to be a little bit overpriced for what you were getting in that. And so I'm certainly very happy with the lens in that regard. Now, the one other lens maybe to consider as a part of the equation is the Samyang AF 24mm f1.8. There's no question that the Sigma is the nicer lens in terms of the build and the construction. Not even a question. However, the Samyang does have a little bit more thorough weather sealing. It does have the focus hold button, and beyond that, it has a 1/3, stop faster maximum aperture and delivers equally good image quality. And so that certainly makes it worthy of consideration, even if it doesn't feel as premium as this lens when you're holding it in the hand. And so if you don't mind that difference and want to save a little bit more money, the Samyang is a great alternative there as well. At the end of the day, it is so great to have so many great options on Sony. And the reason why at the moment Sony is my mirrorless platform of choice is for that simple reason. You've got great alternatives at a variety of price points. You want to go premium, there's the G Master series. But then there's also all of these third-party lenses that are also excellent, maybe with a few more limitations, but they're great options to have on the market. It's a great time to be a photographer with a Sony camera, and I really, really like the new Sigma 24mm f2D. And if I were looking at the f3.5 and the f2, for me, this is the one that I would go with. It hits the sweet spot for me. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full texture review. Also linkage to an image gallery. Check out the photos there. I got a lot of great photos that I really like. This was an easy lens to get them with. There's also buying links there, though as always, with something that is as brand new as this, some of the retailers have not fully fleshed out their listings yet, and so some of those links will become live after a week or so. So check back, and as always, I appreciate you buying through those links to help to support this channel. There's also linkage there to follow myself or Craig on social media, to become a patron, to purchase merchandise, sign up for my newsletter. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Be sure to ring that bell so you get notifications when new content drops. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.